The intense, arid desert air seemed to suffocate every particle of oxygen in Eleanor Vance's lungs, a cruel reminder that the world she knew had been left behind, thousands of miles away, beneath the vibrant sun of New Orleans. Her eyes, accustomed to the deep blue of the Gulf and the lush greenery of Louisiana's lowlands, now lost themselves in the golden vastness of the desert, stretching as far as the eye could see, punctuated by sparse, tenacious vegetation. The Thorn Estate, a fortress of sun-baked adobe and intricate ironwork, emerged from the landscape like an opulent mirage, an overwhelming symbol of power and wealth that would swallow her whole. She stood there in the main courtyard, under a merciless sun that made the bespoke uniforms of the estate guards gleam and the polished bronze sculptures dazzle. Her elegant yet understated cotton dress, chosen for the long and exhausting journey, was a stark contrast to the silk, brocade and jewels that adorned every corner of that place. Ellie felt small, insignificant, a grain of sand lost in the dust storm that was her new reality. Dignity, however, was the only thing she had left, and she held onto it with the strength of one clinging to a thread of hope. She would not permit them to see the tremor in her hands or the fear that cinched her chest like a knot. The promised bride, a female voice whispered, laden with curiosity and perhaps a hint of disdain, in an accent Ellie barely grasped, yet whose tone was universal. She was this, a commodity, payment for the terms of a legacy merger that her father, in his desperation, had agreed to. The Vance house, with its walls steeped in art and music, seemed a distant dream, an echo of a life that would never return. The melodies she used to compose on her guitar, her refuge and her form of expression, were now replaced by the oppressive silence and the constant hum of the desert wind. Then he appeared, Ryder Thorn. The mere mention of his name already carried a weight, an unquestionable authority that seemed to fill the vast courtyard. He did not walk, he advanced, his steps firm and resolute, a king in his own domain. His figure was imposing, clad in a dark, bespoke suit that accentuated his stature and the breadth of his shoulders. His serious countenance, marked by strong features and a meticulously groomed beard, was the expression of a man hardened by life, by losses, and by the responsibilities of leading thorn holdings across the Arizona desert. His eyes, a brown so dark they seemed almost black, were penetrating, sweeping everything around him with an intensity that made the air vibrate. His gaze landed on Ellie. There was no kindness, no compassion, only a cold, calculating assessment, as if he were inspecting a newly acquired object. A mix of curiosity and veiled disdain danced in the depths of those dark irises. She felt naked under that scrutiny, every fiber of her fragility exposed. It was as if he could see through her forced courage, directly to the terrified heart that pounded erratically in her chest. The aura of power that surrounded him was palpable, almost suffocating. "So, this is Eleanor Vance." His voice was deep, grave, and even in pronouncing her name there was no warmth. It was a statement, not a question. He spoke impeccable English, yet with a cadence that rendered each word even more authoritative, the security for an agreement. "My bride." Those words, spoken with such coldness and finality, struck Ellie with the force of a punch to the gut. It was not a request, not a suggestion. It was an imposition, an irrefutable decree. She would not be a wife. She would be property, a tool to fulfill a patriarch's will clause and to seal a legacy merger. The silent cruelty of the situation was overwhelming. Her freedom, her dreams, her future, everything had been stolen, sold, delivered as payment for a mistake she had no fault in. An uncontrollable tremor threatened to overcome her, but Ellie clung to her dignity like a shield. She raised her chin, meeting his gaze with an intensity she hoped would not betray her fear. She was a woman, not an object, and even if she was in his hands, she still possessed her soul. Ryder Thorn arched a brow, a flicker of something that seemed like surprise or perhaps irritation glinting in his eyes. She did not falter. The Thorn Desert customs, with their ancestral laws of power and preservation, seemed a cruel irony in that moment. Though she was being welcomed, it was a forced welcome, a prison of luxury. The confusion in her mind was a maelstrom. How could anyone survive such a brutal destiny? What kind of man was this Baron Thorn who treated her with such coldness, as if she were less than human? The promise of a journey of overcoming seemed a grim joke, but deep within her being, a small flame of resistance began to ignite. The collision of worlds was inevitable, and perhaps, just perhaps, the apparent fragility he so disdained concealed an untamed strength he had yet to know. The game had begun, and Ellie, the promised bride, was about to discover if the desert would break her, or transform her into something far stronger than she had ever imagined. The air conditioning in the Thorn estate was glacial, yet Eleanor Ellie Vance felt a cold sweat prickle beneath the delicate lace that barely concealed her pallid face. Each step on the polished corridor's intricate tiles echoed the hollow ache in her chest. The surrounding opulence, with its lavish golds and polished marbles, was overwhelming, a stark and cruel contrast to the cherished memories of her Vance house in New Orleans, which now seemed a distant, fading dream. She was an outsider, a chess piece maneuvered by a legacy merger, and obligations that were never truly her own. A uniformed attendant, impeccably clad in bespoke Western wear and bearing an impassive gaze, indicated the entrance to one of the opulent drawing rooms. Ellie drew a deep, shuddering breath, a knot tightening in her throat before stepping inside. Ryder Thorn stood by an arched window overlooking a meticulously manicured desert garden adorned with native palms and serene fountains. His imposing silhouette, clad in a dark, custom-tailored suit that hinted at formidable power, exuded an unquestionable authority that felt almost suffocating. As he turned, his dark eyes, fathomless as the desert night, swept over Ellie from head to toe, devoid of any warmth or nascent curiosity. It was an appraising gaze, akin to a man scrutinizing a newly acquired asset. There was no welcoming smile, no flicker of common courtesy. The frigidity was palpable, more piercing than the estate's already chilling air conditioning. Eleanor Vance. Ryder's voice was a low, monotone timbre that brooked no rejoinder. "Welcome to Thorn Estate." The pronouncement resonated more as a statement of incontrovertible fact than an actual invitation. He made a curt gesture with one hand, indicating a velvet armchair opposite him, yet made no move to extend any genuine comfort. Ellie settled onto the chair, feeling minuscule and utterly insignificant before this man who seemed hewn from unyielding stone. The silence that followed was dense, laden with unvoiced expectations. "You comprehend why you are present," he finally resumed, his words sharp, deliberate blows. "A family inheritance agreement was enacted and fulfilled. You are the stipulated consideration." Ellie flinched internally, a tremor running through her, but held his unwavering gaze, resolutely refusing to lower her eyes. "My grandfather, upon his deathbed, imposed a stringent testamentary clause. I must marry and produce an heir to secure the succession and stability of the Thorn Holdings empire. Without this, our line of power would fragment, and disarray would engulf our dominion." He paused, and Ellie discerned that this cold explanation was not offered for her solace, but rather to underscore the immutable inevitability of her predicament. "You are the means to that end, nothing beyond that." The sheer humiliation struck her like a visceral blow, yet Ellie staunchly refused to yield to tears. Her eyes, which had previously brimmed with unshed moisture, now shone with a silent, resolute determination, a wounded pride that adamantly refused to surrender. She was not an object, she was not a mere means. She was Eleanor Vance. "I apprehend my obligations, Mr. Thorn," she managed to articulate, her voice astonishingly steady, despite the internal tremor that threatened to betray her. Ryder regarded her with a subtly arched brow, as if her composed response had taken him unawares. He had anticipated pleas, perhaps even tears, but not this defiant quietude. "Your inherent delicacy disquiets me, Eleanor," he continued, pointedly ignoring her prior utterance, his words dripping with unconcealed disdain. "Your New Orleans origins, your intrinsic sweetness, they are incompatible with the formidable strength and gravitas that a wife within my empire demands. You are far too tender, too ingenuous for the world you are about to enter." He closed the distance between them, and Ellie felt the crushing weight of his formidable presence, the sheer oppression of his raw power. "There shall be no romance, Eleanor, No tenderness. You will be my wife, and you will fulfill what is unequivocally expected of you. I require a matriarch, not a porcelain doll." Ellie felt a slow, simmering heat rise within her, but she maintained her outward composure with an iron will. This man would not break her. She might possess a delicate mien, yet she was anything but fragile, and the very sweetness he so disdained was, in truth, her most resilient armor. "I comprehend my obligations, Mr. Thorne," she reiterated, her voice a hushed whisper that nevertheless carried the potent force of a stifled cry. Her profound quietude, the utter absence of desperation, began to intrigue Ryder Thorne, a man accustomed to witnessing women bend and break before his formidable will. This woman, however, possessed an elusive spark, an unidentifiable essence that he could not quite grasp. The wedding ceremony, commencing mere hours later, unfolded as a grand spectacle of opulence and rigid formality, utterly devoid of any genuine jubilation. Ellie felt herself a mere character trapped within a Southern Gothic drama, yet without the anticipated romantic narrative. The expansive ballroom of the Thorne estate was teeming with influential figures and dignitaries, all impeccably attired in high-end southwestern formal wear, their curious, judgmental gazes fixed upon her. The murmur of voices, thick with Arizona regionalisms, seemed an oppressive, relentless soundtrack, and she acutely felt the burden of every stare, the crushing sensation of being an interloper, an outsider, a mere contractual obligation. The officiating judge recited the solemn words, and Ryder, with his unyielding posture, intoned the phrases of acceptance. There was no exchange of rings in the conventional sense, merely stacks of documents signed with the chilling finality of a legal decree, sealing Ellie's fate. She was now officially Mrs. Thorne, a title that felt both weighty and utterly hollow upon her tongue. The profound absence of any affection or genuine celebration in their union underscored the brutal reality. She was a possession, not a partner. The unwritten laws of the desert magnates and the traditions of arranged marriages for strategic alliance were unquestionable within this sphere, and Ryder's calculated demeanor was socially accepted, even anticipated. As the reception continued its rehearsed formality, Ellie felt herself progressively more isolated, a bewildering question mark amidst an absolute certainty. Her mind drifted homeward, to the caressing warmth of the New Orleans sun, to the soulful melody of a guitar, a solace she cherished playing. Now, her future was the arid desert, and her husband, a man who had implicitly promised to claim her, to mold her until she adapted, until her inherent resilience hardened into unyielding fortitude. The sun began its descent across the western horizon, painting the vast sky in resplendent hues of fiery orange and profound violet, and the wedding night drew near, ushering in the imminent confrontation she knew was inescapable. Ryder had warned her with chilling candor, and she knew he would fulfill his promise. There would be no romance, only the stark imposition of his indomitable will, an intense intimacy regime designed to irrevocably break her spirit. The journey to the Thorne Canyon retreat awaited, and Ellie wondered with a dread certainty precisely what measures Mr. Thorne would employ to harden his new wife. The bespoke conveyance, quieter than a whisper, cut through the Arizona desert, carrying Ellie to an uncertain destination, yet one already laden with omens. The sun began its farewell, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a spectacle that in another life would have been inspiring, but now seemed merely the harbinger of a somber night. When they finally sighted the Thorne Canyon retreat, Ellie noted the place was imposing, yet the sensation of isolation was palpable, almost suffocating. Far from the bustle and opulence of the Thorne estate, this fortress amidst the arid expanse felt like a gilded cage, erected to seal secrets and destinies. She barely had time to absorb the cold grandeur of the place when the wind began to howl, bringing with it not merely fine desert grit, but a ferocity that promised more than a simple breeze. A devastating haboob erupted shortly after their arrival, swallowing the retreat in a dark orange vortex. The windows trembled under the wind's force, and the sound outside was a constant lament, severing any lingering connection to the outer world. Ryder, with his unyielding posture, observed nature's fury with an expression Ellie could not decipher, but which, somehow, seemed to mirror the storm brewing between them. They were isolated, completely at the mercy of each other and that hostile environment. There was nowhere to flee, nor to call for aid. Their fate was sealed, bound by the desert and the magnate's caprice. It was the catalyst he sought, a scenario of inevitability and confrontation designed to intensify every dynamic between them. On their wedding night, Ryder Thorne wasted no time with pleasantries. In the lavish chamber, with heavy drapes blocking the storm's view but not its sound, he approached Ellie, his tall, imposing shadow cast upon the wall. His gaze was glacial, devoid of any warmth or affection. "There will be no romance, Ellie," he stated, his grave voice cutting the air like a blade. "There will be no tenderness until you become the strong, resilient woman my empire demands as its queen. You came to fulfill a purpose, and I will make you the wife I require." The cold warning echoed in the weighty silence, making it clear that the night would not be one of union, but of subjugation. Ellie felt a shiver trace her spine, a mix of fear and a strange determination. He sought to break her, but the steel magnolia core within her refused to yield. From that night, and in the days that followed under the siege of the dust storm, Ellie was subjected to what Ryder called an intense intimacy regime. These were not acts of love, but calculated demonstrations of power and possession, each touch an affirmation of dominion. He kissed her with a breath-stealing intensity, his lips demanding a response, his fingers exploring with a precision that left her adrift. Ellie felt like an instrument, an object of his will. He pushed her to the limits of pleasure, seeking her breakdown, the total surrender of her spirit. He desired to see her fragility ebb, her sweetness transform into submission. Each intimate encounter was a silent battle, where Ryder endeavored to dismantle her defenses, believing Ellie's perceived fragility was a weakness that needed to be eradicated at any cost. Yet, to the magnate's own surprise, Ellie did not break. She did not resist with anger, nor with open defiance, but with a silent resilience that both frustrated and profoundly intrigued him. Her eyes, once clouded with apprehension, now held a stillness that disarmed him. She absorbed every touch, every word from him without bowing. There was a strength in her sweetness, a subtle stubbornness that prevented him from completely dominating her. Where he expected a cry, she sighed. When he sought submission, she offered a physical surrender that was more of body than of spirit, keeping her essence untouched. This woman, who seemed as delicate as a wildflower, possessed an unexpected tenacity, an ability to absorb impact without collapsing. Like the desert sand that shifts but does not shatter. The isolated retreat, with its empty luxuries and silent corridors, transformed into a gilded prison. Ellie spent her days observing Ryder, attempting to decipher the man behind the armor of power. She sought cracks in his serious countenance, in his impenetrable gaze. His every gesture, every word, was analyzed. As she tried to understand the depth of his coldness, the reason for such harshness, the psychological tension between them was almost palpable, a battle of wills waged in silence through glances and minimal gestures. The claustrophobia of the environment, amplified by the incessant storm that held them captive, was a constant weight. Ryder, in turn, felt increasingly bewildered. Ellie's silent resistance, her obstinate sweetness, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. He was accustomed to breaking people, to dominating wills. But Ellie was different. Each time he thought he had cornered her, she deflected, not with flight, but with a presence that forced him to see her, to feel her in a way he had not anticipated. Frustration mounted, but alongside it, a seed of something new began to germinate within him, an undeniable curiosity about this woman he could not fully command. With each burgeoning dawn at the Thorn Canyon retreat, Ryder anticipated finding Eleanor broken, perhaps with tears in her eyes or some discernible mark of submission. Instead, he encountered a quietude that disarmed him in a peculiar manner, an almost irksome serenity that refused to yield. Days stretched endlessly beneath the desert's relentless sun, and with each calculated advance from Ryder, whether through carefully chosen words or the overwhelming intimacy he imposed, Eleanor responded with a calm that left him utterly perplexed. Her eyes, once brimming with palpable fear, now held a depth that, without uttering a single syllable, challenged him to decipher their guarded secrets. She did not cry out, nor did she plead, nor did she thrash in desperate struggle. Instead, her presence seemed to expand, becoming more solid, more unyielding each time he endeavored to diminish her. In moments of profound physical proximity, when Ryder anticipated witnessing her fragility completely dissipate, Eleanor maintained an almost glacial dignity. Her soft sounds might have been of pleasure, yet never of absolute surrender. It was as if, even as she yielded her body, her spirit remained untouched, an impregnable fortress amidst the intense intimacy regime he had meticulously orchestrated. This was not the outcome he had envisioned. He desired her complete dissolution, her unequivocal submission, the confession that she was his, utterly and irrevocably. But Eleanor, with her persistent sweetness, was proving to be a formidable adversary, a tough nut to crack, as they might say back in New Orleans. Ryder began to discern the finer details, something his mind, accustomed to vast strategies and the management of empires, rarely deigned to undertake. He observed her poring over books concerning the desert Southwest, a regional dictionary often at her side, absorbing the nuances of his world with a dedication that astonished him. She spent hours sketching in a simple-bound notebook, her talented hands rendering forms and landscapes he could not readily identify, yet which exuded a singular beauty. At times, she merely contemplated the desert through the expansive window, her gaze fixed upon the golden dunes, as if seeking something beyond the shimmering horizon. In those quiet moments, she was not merely the promised bride, the repayment of a familial obligation. She was Eleanor Vance, a woman possessing a vibrant inner world that he had barely begun to scratch the surface of. Subtle acts of consideration began to manifest, utterly devoid of any subservience. Ryder would discover his study impeccably arranged, papers organized in a manner he had never requested, yet which undeniably streamlined his work. On one particularly sweltering afternoon, she presented him with a chilled beverage, a blend of mint tea and citrus that he favored, but which no one dared prepare without explicit instruction. She offered it, not with the demeanor of a servant, but with a gracefulness that profoundly irritated him, for there was no justifiable means by which to rebuke her for such a thoughtful gesture. It was a subtle maneuver, a quiet demonstration that she not only observed but also acted with an autonomy he had never officially granted her. It was as if she were articulating without words, "I am not your captive, I am your wife, and I comprehend your needs, even if unspoken." The isolated retreat, encircled solely by the boundless expanse of the dunes, intensified this burgeoning dynamic. Devoid of the courtly distractions or the relentless demands of his empire, Ryder was compelled to confront Eleanor, and indeed himself, within an intimate, inescapable arena. The power struggle which he had envisioned triumphing over with effortless ease was transforming into a psychological war of wills. Eleanor, with her astute emotional intelligence, was meticulously crafting small fissures in Ryder's formidable armor, not with brute force, but with the persistent, unyielding nature of water that sculpts solid rock. He had anticipated a pliable porcelain doll, but instead discovered a steel magnolia, possessing the innate sweetness and resilience of one forged amidst the vibrant chaos and profound beauty of New Orleans. His mind, long accustomed to issuing commands and receiving unwavering obedience, began to become inextricably entangled in thoughts of her. Why did she not weep? Why did she not beseech him? Where was the profound breakage he so ardently yearned for? Instead of succumbing, she appeared to strengthen, absorbing her formidable surroundings, adapting like a resilient wildflower of the desert. Ryder's irritation was a palpable, tightening knot in his stomach, intensifying with each serene gaze, each discreet, enigmatic smile she bestowed upon him. He struggled to comprehend how such a delicate woman could possess such stubborn fortitude, such intrinsic strength. Eleanor's power did not reside in aggression, but in her unshakable capacity to preserve the very essence of who she was, even beneath the extreme pressures of her stark new world. She was akin to those rare blossoms that emerge in the Arizona desert after a meager rain, enduring drought with an unexpected, tenacious beauty. And for Ryder Thorne, the desert baron, This quiet resistance, this sweetness that was undeniably not weakness, was becoming more than a mere irritation. It was beginning to morph into an inconvenient yet undeniable admiration, a dangerous sentiment he possessed no comprehension of how to control. He, the relentless Baron, was being disarmed by a New Orleanian woman who defiantly refused to be what he expected, and this profound realization was the true tremor reverberating through his empire of absolute control. With each passing day at the Thorn Canyon retreat, Ryder Thorn felt the foundation of his conviction crack a little more, like parched desert earth under the unforgiving sun. His tactics, once infallible with any woman who dared cross his path, seemed to encounter an invisible yet unbreakable wall in Eleanor Vance. He had subjected her to a calculated intimacy regime that, in his relentless logic, should have pulverized any trace of resistance, transforming her into the malleable partner his empire demanded. Yet she did not break. On the contrary, her silent resilience, that sweet and almost naive demeanor he had initially disdained, appeared to be the strongest armor he had ever encountered. A profound irritation simmered within him, a frustration stemming not from open defiance or direct confrontation, but from her inability to yield in the manner he anticipated. It was like trying to hold fine desert sand. The tighter he clenched, the more it slipped through his fingers. And deep within that irritation, a pang of something he was reluctant to admit: admiration. He found himself observing her, his penetrating eyes following her every movement through the luxurious Thorn Canyon retreat, trying to decipher the source of that inner strength, which defied all his expectations. Eleanor was not one to fight with sharp words or grand gestures. Her resistance was subtle, almost passive yet relentless. He watched her interact with the few staff members who kept the isolated retreat in order, and the genuine kindness in her smile, the way she thanked them for a glass of water or a clean towel, struck him in a place he thought had long been dormant. She was not fragile, he realized with an almost electric shock. She was different. His own prejudices about women, about the fragility he associated with femininity, began to disintegrate under the weight of Eleanor's reality. It was not weakness, it was a quiet strength, a river that flowed beneath the surface, shaping the landscape without fanfare. Ryder's irritation intensified not merely because he could not break her, but paradoxically, because he felt a growing attraction to this woman who challenged him without a single word of defiance. It was a perilous game, an emotional tug-of-war he had never imagined engaging in. Her touches, once seen as tools of his domination, now affected him in a way he could not control. The softness of her skin, the scent of her hair, the way she nestled against him in bed, even if out of duty, stirred a maelstrom of contradictory feelings within him. He desired her, yes, with an intensity that frightened him, but no longer in the same way. The desire to possess her for control was transforming into a desire to possess her for something more, something he dared not name. The internal turmoil within Ryder was a desert whirlwind within his soul. He questioned what he truly desired from her: submission or an equal partner, someone who could bear the weight of his world and simultaneously bring a light he never knew he needed. The isolation of the Thorn Canyon retreat, once a tactic to force her submission, now compelled him to confront his own feelings and expectations. There were no distractions, only golden dunes stretching as far as the eye could see, and Eleanor's silent, powerful presence. He found himself wondering if the toughening he demanded from Eleanor was not in fact a projection of his own insecurities, of the crushing burden of his responsibilities as the desert baron. Perhaps he was trying to mold her in his own image of hardiness, so she could survive in his unforgiving world. Or perhaps, and this was the most unsettling truth, he wanted her strong for himself, so she could be the pillar he had never allowed anyone to be. The power dynamic, which he believed he had established with an iron fist, subtly began to shift. Eleanor, through her active passivity, her unwavering sweetness, was gaining emotional ground, conquering a space in Ryder's heart that he had sworn never to open. The tension between them was palpable, woven into Ryder's intense gazes that devoured her, attempting to unravel her innermost secrets. His internal monologues were battlegrounds, where pride and duty wrestled against an attraction and a respect he could no longer deny. Confusion became his new companion. He felt drawn to something he, Ryder Thorn, the Desert Baron, despised, the apparent fragility that concealed monumental strength. This contradiction disturbed him profoundly, destabilizing the man who had always held all the answers. Days dragged on, and with them, Ryder's armor displayed its first cracks. The humanization of the relentless Baron was underway, slow, painful, but inevitable. He, the man who viewed love as a weakness, was beginning to feel the pangs of something akin to care, an instinctive protection for the woman from New Orleans who refused to be broken. Little did he know that this new and perplexing dynamic would soon be tested. When the doors of the Thorn Canyon retreat would open to an external interference that promised to shake the fragile balance they had barely found. The fury of the Haboob, which for days had isolated the Thorn Canyon retreat, finally began to recede, revealing a sky of profound blue and golden sands that shimmered under the scorching sun. Scarcely had the gusts lessened when the stillness hovering over the estate was broken by the sound of approaching vehicles. Ryder and Eleanor, who were in one of the grand halls, sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Thorn, with his habitually serious demeanor, perceived the arrival of an unwelcome presence even before any of the guards could announce it. His dark eyes fixed on the main entrance, where an elegant and imposing figure materialized. Seraphina Hayes, Ryder's former paramour, swept into the retreat with the confident ease of one who still considered herself mistress of the place. Her silken black hair framed a face of stunning beauty, heightened by eyes that held a glint of defiance and a veiled cruelty. She wore a bespoke emerald silk gown that complemented her tanned skin, and every one of her movements exuded a calculated self-assurance. Eleanor, beside Ryder, felt a shiver trace down her spine. Seraphina's presence was a palpable force, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity Eleanor strived to maintain. "Ryder, my dear, what a surprise to find you so well," Seraphina purred, her melodic voice seeming to carry a subtle venom. Her eyes swept over Eleanor from head to toe, a scrutiny bordering on disdain, before returning to Ryder with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "News of the storm left me so concerned. I came as soon as I could, merely to ensure you were safe." She drew nearer, and the heady aroma of her sophisticated fragrance filled the room, a scent Ryder recognized from a distant past. Ryder, though irritated by the intrusion, maintained his authoritative posture. "Seraphina, your concern is unnecessary. We are perfectly well." He did not invite her closer, creating an invisible barrier between them. His eyes shifted to Eleanor, an almost imperceptible gesture of inclusion. Seraphina, however, ignored the coolness in Ryder's voice. "And who is this guest?" she asked, though she knew very well who Eleanor was. The tone of her voice in referring to Eleanor as a guest was a clear attempt to diminish the New Orleans woman's status, to suggest she was a temporary intruder. Eleanor, despite the tightening in her stomach, took a deep breath and lifted her chin. The sweetness in her gaze did not falter, but a spark of wounded pride ignited. "I am Eleanor Vance, Ryder Thorn's wife," she stated, her voice soft yet firm, a stark contrast to Seraphina's veiled aggression. There was no pretense, only the truth Seraphina sought to distort. Seraphina laughed, a dry, disdainful sound. "Ah, yes, the promised bride. The little woman from New Orleans. I heard she came from somewhere different, without tradition, without true understanding of what it means to be the matron of a domain like Thorn Holdings." Her eyes flashed. Ryder always needed a strong woman by his side, someone who understands the weight of his empire, not a fragile bloom that would wilt under the desert sun. With every word, Seraphina sought to plant the seed of doubt, not just in Eleanor, but in Ryder as well. She aimed to destabilize the fragile connection the couple had begun to build. Eleanor felt the impact of the words, a sting to her pride, but she refused to be shaken. She had faced Ryder's initial coldness, the loneliness of isolation, and the uncertainty of her fate. Seraphina's words, though painful, were merely another challenge. She observed Ryder's former paramour with a mix of curiosity about the source of such bitterness and a natural caution before a viper poised to strike. Ryder, for his part, felt the tension escalating in the room, Serafina's manipulations were as obvious as they were unpleasant. He knew her game well, the way she used charm and cruelty to achieve her goals. The mention of a fragile bloom resonated in his mind, for that was exactly how he had initially viewed Eleanor. However, the time he had spent with her at the Thorn Canyon retreat had revealed a resilience he had never expected. Eleanor's sweetness was not weakness, but a subtle strength that disarmed him in unexpected ways. "Serafina, your opinions regarding my wife are irrelevant," Ryder declared, his voice low and controlled, yet with an unquestionable authority that made Serafina recoil a step. "Eleanor is my queen and will be the mother of my children. Her origin does not diminish her, it only makes her unique." Ryder's words were a shock to Serafina. She had expected a reaction, perhaps even a disguised flirtation, but not such a direct and public defense of Eleanor. Her smile faltered and her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Ah, Ryder, you've always been so loyal to your duties," she murmured, attempting to shift tactics. "But I remember when loyalty was something more passionate. I remember nights here in this retreat, under the stars, where there was no place for duty." She tried to rekindle the old flame, a silent invitation to a past she thought still bound him. Eleanor felt the weight of Serafina's words, the intimacy they carried. A pang of jealousy, a new and unsettling emotion struck her. She looked at Ryder, trying to decipher his expression, but the desert baron maintained an impenetrable facade. It was a test, she realized, not just for Ryder, but for herself. Would she be able to endure his past, to trust that the present they were building was real? Ryder felt Eleanor's gaze, and for the first time, the familiarity of the past with Serafina seemed insignificant. He was irritated by her attempts to undermine Eleanor's confidence, and by the way she tried to invade his space. The history that bound them was undeniable, but the man he was now, and the feelings Eleanor awakened in him were far more powerful. Serafina was a ghost, a shadow he was ready to banish. "Serafina, the past is past," Ryder stated, his voice hardening. "The present is Eleanor, and the future as well." He extended his hand to Eleanor, a public and unequivocal gesture of protection and belonging. Eleanor, surprised by the Desert Baron's resolve, placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength that emanated. It was a simple act, yet laden with meaning. Serafina observed the scene, rage simmering in her chest. Her plans were crumbling before her eyes. She had underestimated the woman from New Orleans, and more importantly, had underestimated the impact Eleanor had on Ryder. "You will regret this, Ryder," she hissed, her voice losing its melody and revealing the fury behind the beauty. "This girl is no match for your world. She will disappoint you, and you will come crawling back to me." "No," Ryder replied, his voice a thunderclap in the silence that followed. "Never. Eleanor is all I need, and now I ask you to leave. Your presence is no longer welcome at the Thorn Canyon retreat, nor in Thorn Holdings." It was a final blow, a banishment that sealed Serafina's fate. She paled, the humiliation visible on her face. Without another word, she turned and exited the retreat, her footsteps echoing with suppressed anger. The door closed behind her, and a heavy silence filled the room. Ryder turned to Eleanor, his expression softened. He raised the hand he held and brought it to his lips, kissing it with a tenderness that made Eleanor's heart pound. "I apologize for that," he said, his dark eyes fixed on hers. "I should have anticipated she would come, but I will not let anything or anyone harm you or attempt to diminish your worth." Eleanor felt tears well in her eyes. This was the Ryder she was beginning to know, the man behind the ruthless facade. The Desert Baron who had vowed to possess her until she accustomed herself now promised to protect her. I am not fragile, Ryder," she whispered, her voice choked. "I am from New Orleans. I have steel." He smiled, a rare and genuine smile that illuminated his face. "I know, my queen. I know. And it is precisely that steel, that sweetness, and that strength that I did not know I needed, but that now I cannot live without." He pulled her close, and Eleanor nestled into his arms, feeling safe, cherished, and finally at home. Possession had transformed into protection, duty into desire, and skepticism into a deep, undeniable love. Their journey was only beginning, but now they would face it together. The relentless desert baron had found his queen, and the relentless desert baron had surrendered to love. And thus, the story of Ryder and Eleanor, which began with an inheritance agreement and an arranged marriage, blossomed into a love that defied all expectations and traditions. They built an empire not only of power, but of affection and mutual respect, proving that true strength lies in union and the capacity to surrender to what the heart truly desires. And what do you think of this turning point in our desert baron's heart? Leave your comments, like this story, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters full of passion and overcoming.